Good morning and welcome to week 2 of our budget hearings. Today, all day, we will be joined by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. We will have our session this morning. We'll recess for lunch and then we'll come back this afternoon and continue with the Department of Education. We want to begin by thanking our friends at PDE for being here with us. Our acting secretary, we thank you for being here, and your staff. Chairman Struzzi, do you have any introductory comments?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Harris. Before we begin, I just want to take a moment to say that all of our thoughts and prayers are with Officer Andrew Duarte and everyone involved in that tragedy at UPMC Memorial in York County. And moving on, I welcome the Department of Education here today. We have some very important issues to discuss. Before we begin, I do want to just kind of put this into context about what we're talking about today, because the Department of Education's budget is the second largest chunk of the Pennsylvania budget behind human services. So I want to kind of lay out the numbers for everyone who's here and everyone who's listening so they understand just how important the Department of Education is and how important it is we understand how these funds are being used and that they are being used in the most effective and efficient manner across this Commonwealth to ensure that every student, no matter where they live, has the opportunity for a quality education. So just to lay it out quickly for you before we get to the questions, in the governor's proposed budget for pre-K through 12 education, we're looking at 17.9 or $18 billion, an increase of $787 million or 4.6%. For libraries, we're looking at a budget of $79 million or a $581,000 increase, 0.7%. And then for higher education, we're looking at a budget of a budget of $1.7 billion or a $117 million increase, and an overall educational budget request of $19.7 billion or $905 million increase, or a 4.8% increase. So I think it's important we understand the context of why we're going to ask very important, pointed questions today of the Department of Education, because these are taxpayer dollars and we want to make sure they are being used in the most effective manner for Pennsylvania students. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to begin. Secretary, if you want to introduce yourself, all of the folks who are with you, who'll be testifying, and at the conclusion of that, we will swear in the testifiers and begin with questions.
Good morning, Chairman Harris and Chairman Struzzi and distinguished members of the House Appropriations Committee. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to join you today to discuss Governor Shapiro's 2025-26 proposed budget for the Department of Education. I'm Dr. Carrie Rowe, and I have the honor and the privilege to serve the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as Acting Secretary of Education. Today with me are my colleagues Shantae Brown, the Deputy Secretary of Child Development and Early Learning, Lynette Kuhn, the Deputy Secretary of Post-Secondary and Higher Education, and Jessica Seitz, the Director of the Bureau of Financial Operations. I'm looking forward to your questions today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will remind everyone, in the middle of the table, there's a black box. When that box turns green, members will proceed with their questions. Everybody gets 5 minutes to ask their question. When the light turns yellow, that means that there are 30 seconds left. We ask that members do not go for another question at 30 seconds. And when the light turns red, we ask that our testifiers conclude with their comments. Our goal is to get as many members in and as many questions in as possible. And with that, if the testifiers can please stand so I can swear everyone in. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, so help you God? Thank you. We'll begin with Representative Kincaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start, obviously, for the last several years have been working on universal school meals. So I'm wondering if you can give an update on the universal school breakfast program in terms of the number of students that it served and any feedback about the impact of the program, as well as why universal school meals were not included in the governor's budget proposal.
You absolutely start with something that is of paramount importance. Students shouldn't be going to school and wondering where their next meal is going to come from. The governor's universal free breakfast has allowed the school districts and charter schools across the Commonwealth to serve 90 million school breakfast meals last year, and importantly, in comparison, that is 10 million additional breakfasts than they had the year prior. That's 10 million more breakfasts that students are able to consume and start their day ready to learn. I think it's important also to recognize that the lunch program also had a change that was exceptionally positive. On average, 57% of reduced meal eligible students were partaking in a free lunch as well. And so that's at least 2 meals a day that kids can count on no matter what. So these are a couple of the important pieces to take into consideration related to universal breakfast, and also perhaps one additional statistic, and that would be that 64% of students in the Commonwealth are eligible for a free or reduced meal. And I think that's something that should be in the forefront of our mind as we think about these types of programs.
Thank you. I think it's important also for us to remember that of all the things in school, and we require kids to be in school, meals are the only things that we means test. We don't means test textbooks, but we do means test whether or not a kid gets to eat. I think it's something that we need to address and take seriously, and I appreciate the work that you guys have done on that. In a similar vein, homelessness has increased year over year, 14% in 2023. And our schools frequently lack the resources to address the massive hurdles on attendance and school success that those children face. Knowing that federal education for homeless children and youth grant program that Pennsylvania receives is frequently inadequate, historically inadequate, how can PDE provide Pennsylvania schools with what they need to adequately support the unique needs of those students?
We certainly rely on the federal funding to a great degree to do that. We have a team of dedicated professionals working at the department and also in intermediate units across the state. I think each of us, as we think about homelessness, it's one thing to hear the word or see it in print, to see that number, that statistic that you gave. It's another thing to actually picture the children who don't know where they're going to lay their head at night, who might be sleeping in a car or a camper, those students who somehow still find a way to make it to school. Our laws are set up so that students can in some ways choose which school district or charter school they're going to remain in, even if it's not the location where they lay their head at night. And our team at the Department of Education and those dedicated professionals around the state who work with the students in IUs and the liaisons in the school are all part of helping to connect the families to the resources that they need, and also help them to navigate those hurdles of where the school, which school they're going to be attending.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady. Representative Eckert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary and staff, for being here and answering our questions today. I want to get into the actual budget and specifically the basic education funding. and specifically the Ready to Learn block grant, which, as you know, was based upon the majority report of the basic education funding, and I believe the governor this year put an additional $526 million, which is about a 64% increase into that. And I'm wondering if not, so we're going to talk about that. So when we're talking about this, is this enough funding to close that adequacy gap that is being addressed by the Basic Education Funding Commission and the lawsuit that's been filed?
Yes.
Okay. So it was my understanding that there's still, based upon that report, though, that there's still about $350 million to go. Am I correct about that? Billion. 300 billion, not million.
3.5 billion?
Okay.
I would agree.
Yeah. So additional funding is going to be needed in future years then to close that gap, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So when I look at your budget proposals in the out years, I'm not noticing any allocations to close that gap. Am I right about that?
You are not seeing anything in out years in the printed budget, that's correct.
So, well, let me ask, why is that? Why is that the case? Why are we not accounting for, a gap that clearly the court is telling us that we have to do? We can all agree or disagree on how we're going to get to there, but again, there's no, what we have in front of us currently doesn't have any plan to get there.
I can see where that might cause you some confusion, and the answer is that it is the Assembly's choice. It is the representatives and senators who make that final decision, and the governor who often makes the proposal. Well, in the end, it's you who decide.
Well, Madam Secretary, so are you saying then the governor doesn't have a say in this or doesn't have a proposal? And you as the department secretary, I would think you would care, or let me rephrase that, you would have input, right, as to what you think that number should be, correct?
Well, I certainly have ideas about what the number should be, and I'm sure that the governor does too, but in the end, it is your decision.
So, okay, well, let me put it this way. I think in order to address this adequacy funding gap that's been highlighted by the court, we need to be honest about how we're budgeting out. And I think, as every year you're tasked, like every other agency, to come and provide a budget proposal to us, as the governor provides a budget proposal every year. So I think it's important to be, transparent and have these conversations so that we're understanding in future years when we're tapping into the rainy day fund this year, we got to make sure that we're having budget discussions on how we're going to fund this adequacy gap. Wouldn't you agree?
I absolutely agree. We should have discussions about how that's going to occur.
Okay. Well, I think in the vein of transparency, I think it's really important that we are looking, and not just your department, but every department that the governor's proposing is accounting for those out years, because we have got to pay for this somehow. And the way that our financial status is going, we got to be able to know what those out years are going to look like. And just saying we're going to level fund it when we know we're not going to level fund it, we know it's going to be increased. I think it's important to be transparent. So I thank you for your time, Madam Secretary.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Young.
Good morning, everyone, and happy Black History Month. We know that teacher shortage is particularly acute in schools with higher shares of students of color and low-income backgrounds. However, there are programs like Teach for America that actively recruit individuals who might not otherwise consider education as a profession to teach in historically underfunded and underserved public schools. My question to you would be, what is the department doing to support such organizations that are growing they're growing the teachers' pipeline, but they are also entering an educational workforce in non-traditional ways? How are we keeping the interest of those individuals who are in that particular pipeline, and how do we introduce them to want to stay in these underserved schools?
So there are a couple of things I can point to here. First, a lot of the work that you're talking about, it goes throughout the Department of Education, not to a single individual. But if I had to point to a single individual, it would be the Chief Talent Officer and our policy team that have been pulling out important data for not only the department to consider, but also school districts to consider, and programs like the ones that you mentioned. Those statistics are, or I should say data points, are put onto the department's website as part of our desire to be more transparent. It's helping us to consider issues of attracting, preparing, and retaining a workforce that is representative of the complexion of Pennsylvania. And we recognize the importance of doing so. So I think that's one of the things that we're doing at this point. We're also taking a look at apprenticeships and alternate pathways to certification, reducing barriers by eliminating fees where that's possible, reducing our time for certification. All of these things together begin to help us and help programs like the ones that you describe to bring more people into the teaching profession.
So correct me if I'm mistaken, but it sounds like what you're describing are activities to real-time recruit and maintain. My question is, what have been done successfully thus far, and what are we going to continue to work towards? Because this is not a new issue, right, for the department. And so I guess I'm more interested in what recruitment activities have you had in the past that you might say, hey, listen, I need to revisit this, or this is something we need to continue. So I'm listening for what has happened that you're trying to continue, or what you need to shift, because I'm not sure I understood your answer to, I just want to make sure I understand your answer.
So what are some of the things that we have done that have positively influenced the teacher shortage? So one of the things that we've done that just very recently, let's say the first cohort ended, is related to special education teachers. We created a pathway with our higher education partners that allows students to move through the program to become a certified special education teacher in just 18 months. We just graduated our first cohort of individuals in December, and we have 142 new special education teachers because of it. That's something that we looked at. We said part of the problem that we have is how long it takes. There are people who already have a bachelor's degree. How can we get them in sooner? And this was one of the things that we could do. So perhaps they already have a teaching degree and they would like to become a special education teacher, or perhaps they only have a bachelor's degree and they'd like to enter the field. And now we've created a pathway for them to do that.
And Madam Secretary, would you say that that includes those individuals who are in programs such as Teach for America?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank the gentlelady, Representative Mustela.
Thank you, Chairman Harris. Thank you for this time, Dr. Rowe. I'd like to discuss school district expenditures and how they relate to student performance. There's an assumption that more spending at a school district will automatically result in better test scores. And we look at the data, it's all over the spectrum. We had an IFO report that came out recently that really said there's little or no correlation between more funding and better test scores. So, you know, as I've said, the data is all over the board here. And so a couple questions with regard to that. Can you please cite exact examples of where making a higher investment is showing better test results?
So I don't know that we can say that there's a one-to-one correlation, that simply adding money is going to beget immediately higher test scores. What I can say is that underfunding school districts we've seen has led to, in some places, lower test scores. I think it's a more complicated issue than than simply adding additional funding. There are issues that each community faces that either assist or can sometimes cause additional concerns when students are entering school and leading to performance issues. Funding then would help us with staffing. It would help us to lower class sizes. It would help us to ensure that we have a safe and welcoming environment, such as having the right mental health staff and psychologists and school security personnel.
Where would that funding be appropriated to? More of the rural areas or more of the urban areas? Where are you seeing that? Where would that help, like you're saying, with the increase in
Well, I think that helps
funding?
all schools, certainly. And it would, the adequacy funding is helping those who need the funding the most according to the elements of the formula.
And with that, do you have any sort of, discussion right now to show that student achievement on the PSSAs that excludes students who are chronically absent? Because that's a problem that I'm hearing quite a lot of in recent months.
Yeah.
How are you focusing in on that?
So first we have to determine root cause. What is causing students not to come to school? What is causing them to, if they do it chronically, to be truant? And I think it's when we begin to align our resources to make those determinations that we can find out. Now, some students, and I might have been one of these when I was in high school, some students might say that they're bored, right? They're looking for something to capture their interest. And you're from Butler County, and in Butler County, Butler Area School District is doing something really unique that I think probably would have benefited a student like me, who at that point was kind of middle of the road. They're allowing students who aren't your high flyers, who aren't the ones who are taking every AP course that's available, to try on what it feels like to go onto a college campus. They're allowing their B students or their C students to go to Butler area or Butler County Community College and earn dual credit so that now they can see themselves on campus. And if the student's particular root cause issue for not attending were that they would say that they were bored or that they weren't being challenged or that, any one of those things, something like that would help.
Well, then, can I suggest this maybe? Why don't you take some of that money and maybe make this into a statewide pilot program then? If Butler is doing it the right way, maybe Dr. White can teach other superintendents across the other 67 counties, maybe something that we could do.
I think Dr. White absolutely could.
Where students are not bored, they're not being taught to these tests every year, and that they can think on their own, they can critically think, they can have imaginations again, they can learn. Is that something that you're looking at as well?
To look at best practices and have that extrapolated across the state?
Yeah, maybe educating other superintendents on another opportunity that is
absolutely, absolutely something that we plan to do, I should say, even.
Getting back to the truancy, because I don't know how much time I have left, I'm so sorry. How are you going to hold parents and guardians responsible if we make this investment, this higher investment, all the money that you want to put in, and kids are still going to be chronically absent? Do you have any sort of areas in there, any guide rails that you're going to hold the parents and guardians accountable for this?
Yeah, I think parents and guardians should be held accountable to the degree to which the problem is within their control. If you've ever tried to get a teenager to do something they don't want to do, you can appreciate how, to some degree, some of the issues may not be within their control. I say this because I mean that there's a difference in the way we should treat individuals based on whether or not the parent is doing everything they can to get the student to attend school, and they're still not attending, and the parent who perhaps hasn't done that, which I generally find not to be the case. So I think we have to have an entire continuum of things to consider related to how we would treat those individual circumstances. And I welcome any ongoing conversations about truancy.
Okay, thank you. And I look forward to the afternoon session as well. Thank you.
Thank the gentlelady, Representative Friel.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. I want to continue our discussion on the budget. A lot of discussion has been on the court case and our increased funding, but we've also had increased costs, and we have increased costs that have come across in the form of payments out to things like our charter schools and cyber charter. We've had increased transportation costs. When I look at the amount of state funding, and it has failed to keep up with the increase in cost, and we fund less percent of our schools today than we did. And just for example, on transportation alone, it used to be in 2000, 54% of our funding came from the state. Now it's down to 35%, and it's been declining each time. Even though we're increasing the budget here, we're doing so less, and it falls on the property tax. Do you have any thoughts on what are the best ways to balance the budget? Are there cost drivers at the schools, be it transportation, be it charters or cyber charters, be it unfunded mandates that are most challenging to our school districts, and not able to deploy the increase in funding that we're allowed to programmatic changes, but rather just kind of fill in gaps?
There are certainly a lot of things that I've heard schools do to try and reduce their costs. Just recently, I had a meeting with the superintendent at Northwest Area School District. He talked about realigning his bus routes so that, and this makes perfect sense to a superintendent, but I think it can make sense here too, so that the buses that come in for high school can then turn around and make the elementary route. But that means that you have to specifically align the time, the start time of both of those schools. And that's something that he did to reduce the costs, and it's something that was well within his control to do. That can also reduce the amount of buses that one needs when you're needing to turn over a fleet. Sometimes it makes sense for districts to consider outsourcing. Not always, and I'm not necessarily a proponent of that, but just from a dollars and cents perspective, that's something they could do. Sharing buses when they're going to a school that is specialized. When you're sending students to another placement, it's possible that other schools in your area are doing the same thing. And so sharing transportation there.
But if I could interrupt you for a second,
Sure.
Because, I mean, you're talking about efficiency, the bus routing, which is not going to, I don't think would become close to making up. You know, it's almost $2 billion in transportation costs in Pennsylvania. About $700 million of it's reimbursed by the state. You know, concede maybe there's some small efficiencies, but it's not going to approach what are the real cost drivers. We deliver a lot less students to many, many more schools today. We have special education needs that have been climbing and growing, and our transportation needs for those students, those transportation accommodations are much more expensive. The formula doesn't consider those. Is there any consideration to actually getting to some of the, you know, beyond just the light efficiencies, which I think our formula kind of drives towards, real underlying root problems of where those cost drivers and how we could attack that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think perhaps I misunderstood the crux of your question. When I wrote a note to myself, I wrote cost drivers within the control of districts. So that's why I went in that direction. But absolutely, I think there's a desire certainly to get the best and brightest together to consider the formula itself and consider where greater efficiencies can be made on a formula basis. That makes a lot of sense. Similar to what's being done right now with cyber.
And just to kind of follow up on the cyber part and our overall budget, I know we've been, you know, we talked about multiple years to get to a adequacy budget target. Are you encouraging school districts to plan multiple years to put programmatic changes in place? What is PDE's message to school districts in regards to how to budget the dollars coming in on the adequacy targets? As I think it was alluded to earlier, you know, the annual the budget looks like at a 1 year, we're going to do something this year proposal, but 5 years out, 3 years out, and how are school districts going to make programmatic changes unless they do a multiple year and have a consistent and projectable budget?
I agree. I think that the end of your question is really the answer. School districts need predictability and they need stability. So the changes that have been made to the base year in the BEF, as well as ongoing commitments throughout the over the course of the next several years are going to be very important for us to realize the changes that we want to see in schools.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman, for exceeding my time there.
Thank the gentleman, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. Madam Secretary, when we look at the primary lines for school districts in this budget, including basic education, special education, and the Ready to Learn block grant, we see a combined increase of $641 million, or an average of 6.2%. But when you look at the individual school districts, you see changes that range from very small increases, in some cases decreases, to 16% increase. I'd like to focus on the districts with the small increases, which are the majority of my school districts, and they are typically in rural areas. There are 27 districts that received combined increases in these lines of 0.5% or less. And most of them, as I said, are small rural districts. What can we say to those small districts that are barely getting an increase from this budget proposal?
Yeah, as a former superintendent, I can appreciate the difficulty that superintendents who are receiving very little in the new adequacy funding would have. When you're faced with the same challenges as your school district peers around you and you perceive that they are getting more than you are, it's easy to feel like you're left behind. What I would say is that the purpose of the adequacy funding is to drive the funding to the school district that need it most, according to the elements of the formula. And to that degree, the formula is doing exactly as it should, and school districts that aren't receiving it may be benefiting in other ways, for example, through the increased basic education funding, through changes in cyber tuition and CTE funding, and in other ways. So they may realize a greater benefit in those areas.
Last year, we added $826 million to the Ready to Learn block grants to fund adequacy and tax equity supplements. Each has its own list of acceptable uses, with the adequacy supplement focused on quality academic supports and programs to help students. While I realize we are only halfway through the first year of implementation, do you have a sense of what the most common uses for these grants, based on the applications that you've seen, has been?
I absolutely do. One of the areas where we see it used the most is with changes to academic performance of students. These would be things like changing curriculum and providing additional supportive personnel or resources. That's probably one of the highest, that and also full-day kindergarten. We saw a couple of school districts that previously only had half-day kindergarten change to full-day, and that can be a really expensive undertaking because essentially you need twice the staff and perhaps twice the space as well. And so they were able to undertake that because of that historic funding and because of the legislative body moving forward with additional funding.
So in your opinion, do you think we're striking the right balance between efficiency and accountability?
I think we are moving in the right direction, and I think the calibration of how much money goes through what fund is something that we're going to need to work on as a body, as one, as we move forward. I don't think that there's necessarily any clear answers, but what I can tell you is that the money that has been received by school districts so far has been well used and very much appreciated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank the gentlelady. Representative Abney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary and staff, for being here. Greatly appreciate it. As you are aware, last week the Auditor General released a performance-based audit of 5 cyber charter schools. In the audit, it notes that an increased enrollment and a tuition rate that is not aligned with the actual cost of providing an online education has allowed these 5 cyber charter schools to increase their fund balance reserves by 144% over 3 years. The report also highlighted the Commonwealth Charter Academy spending of $196 million to purchase or renovate 21 buildings. And so I know in the governor's proposed budget, he is calling for an $8,000 flat rate for cyber charter schools students, which would save a school district like mine, Pittsburgh Public Schools, around $17 million annually. And so I just want to kind of get your knee-jerk reactions from the Auditor General's report. What do you think about some of the findings that were in the report? And what other cyber charter reforms should we as a legislative body be looking at, like fund balance limits or capital spending guardrails to protect taxpayers?
And to say that I was anything less than exceptionally concerned by the Auditor General's report would be an understatement. I think what that report does is highlight in real time some of the concerns that we already knew existed. And it allows us to bring into a sharper focus some of Governor Shapiro's ideas about how we can go about making changes that are going to help all school districts across the Commonwealth. Last year, there was the transfer subsidy that allowed school districts to bring back about 9% of the tuition that they sent to cyber schools. That's something that helped the districts, but it did nothing to reduce the very large fund balances that cyber schools currently have. And certainly when you juxtapose the 41% fund balances that charter schools have, that cyber schools have, with the approximate 10% fund balances that school districts have, it certainly is concerning. And the $8,000 tuition is something that will also assist in lowering those fund balances to something that is more reasonable, while at the same time providing relief to school districts. It seems to me that an $8,000 tuition wouldn't harm the cyber schools, given that they have 41% fund balances, while at the same time it will provide some relief to school districts who need it the most.
Thank you. I want to switch gears just really quickly. Last session, I sponsored a resolution that was passed that charged the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee to study the non-academic barriers and challenges to students getting into our career and technical education programs. So right now, that committee is going through the process of producing that report, and I'm sure at some point they're going to want to interview or survey PDE for their thoughts on it. But just kind of want to get your feelings and your impressions on some of the challenges that some of our students who are on wait lists, on why they are on these wait lists for our CTE programs.
Yeah, I'm not sure which is worse, not asking a student, what would you like to do when you leave high school, or asking them and then saying, how about your second choice? How about your third choice, when there isn't room in the CTE program in their particular area? And that's something that a lot of our CTE programs, that's a problem that a lot of them are facing, that they have done so well at promoting career and technical education and embedding themselves in the the work that is needed in particular areas across the state, that there's too much demand and not enough space. And so it's certainly, on the one hand, a good problem to have, but also something that's slightly complicated. One of the things that we're looking to do is move some of those CTE programs into school districts, still run by the CTCs themselves, perhaps, but move it into a school district that has the space and allow the CTCs to operate those programs that have the large machinery that they might need. I visited a school district, Wallenpaupack, and I'm getting the hook here, but I visited them, and what they have been able to achieve with not much additional space in the CTE space has been nothing short of amazing. And to the gentle lady over here who talked about finding the best in schools and extrapolating that across the state, that's another place we could certainly learn from Wallenpaupack.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Thanks, gentlemen. Representative Kutz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, thank you for joining us and the team. We appreciate you being here to answer questions. I want to ask about the funding in general. I have a privilege to represent a large growing community in Cumberland County. And when it comes to education funding, several districts in Cumberland County, I believe, are at a disadvantage because the funding does not accommodate for their population growth. I represent the fastest growing township in the fastest growing county and the fastest growing school district in the Commonwealth. And it's a trifecta. It's interesting how it came to be. But unfortunately, as we've seen these new spend numbers come out, what we're seeing across the board at multiple districts that I represent in the 87th district are that their population increases are not being taken into account with funding. For example, one district is forced to spend 9 figures on new buildings, and in 3 years when those new buildings will open, they will be at capacity already. They are playing catch up just to be able to have enough seats for the classrooms. And as a result of the lack of I believe, a proper increase, property taxes in our community will continue to rise, and I'm worried particularly for seniors in my community who can't afford another property tax increase. One district in particular has been 12 straight years to the index. So, Madam Secretary, my question is, what role do you see population growth moving forward in funding? And as school facility monies are allocated, why aren't growing districts like those in Cumberland County receiving more money to build or renovate to accommodate growth when they have such large capital outlays in their budgets?
Wow, what a question. There's so much to unpack in that. First, I would say that the formulas that are in place, from basic education funding to adequacy to the tax supplement, each one of those is formulaic. It is, at least for the last two in particular, adequacy and tax, it's balancing all school districts on exactly the same metric. That type of equality instead of equity can be disconcerting to school districts who perceive that they're not receiving the right amount of funding. But what I will say is that the funding formula is working exactly how it was designed to work. And to the degree to which there are problems with the way the funding formula is working, either there would be changes to the formula itself or additional issues outside of the formula would be considered. For example, PlanCon has been something that's been on a moratorium for years. No new funding, no new projects have come into PlanCon since, I believe, 2017. And so we look at things like the governor's increases to last year to PDE and DCED, and this year all of the funding going to DCED for facilities. We had some excellent projects that really helped school districts, not to build a new building as you're suggesting, but kind of on the other side to deal with schools that had lead in their drinking water or asbestos in their walls, or the roof was leaking when it rained, things like that.
And Madam Secretary, I want to be clear, those are all worthy investments. No student should be going to a school and have those health concerns as a result. I guess my concern is I had a district that was once largely rural that is now a suburban hub. And so I'm concerned, and you say the formula is working exactly as designed. My follow-up to that would be, if you want to go by adequacy, one district had the highest adequacy gap in the state, $24 million, yet they're not receiving funding to close that gap. And so you have a lot of factors in place. So I'm curious why, in particular, I'm going to see a 1.6% increase for that district when, according to the adequacy formula you say is working as designed, they fall well short of where they should be in terms of state funding. And I guess the point I would make, Secretary, is just our residents send their 3.07% to the Commonwealth just like everyone across the state. So when they're not getting what I believe is a fair share of state funding, our piece of the pie, if you will, it's as if their money is now going to be subsidizing some of the other districts when the state itself, through this formula, has already demonstrated that this district has a greater need than those that they're actually sending money to.
Okay, and because we're still with a green light here, let me see if I can pass to the Budget Deputy Secretary and see if she can take a stab at your question.
Sure. Thanks for your question. I appreciate the chance to talk about these two new formulas. We have the adequacy and the tax equity that were both passed bipartisan in a bipartisan effort last July. The adequacy formula has two pieces. It has an adequacy gap piece, which is calculated based on a per student amount that's in Act 55 of 2024. And then it has a local effort piece that looks at, okay, you have an adequacy gap. So the school district has to be calculated an adequacy gap, which you mentioned.
If you don't mind,
and then it has to be looked
I'm
at
sorry,
the local
I know we're at the red light, and I don't want you to have to walk through the whole explanation because I'm familiar with it. I did my research last year when the bill came up, so I appreciate the explanation. Maybe just a commitment for us to have a conversation about this moving forward. I would certainly welcome that. That way I can be respectful of the chairman and other members' time.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Khan.
Thank you, Chairman Harris, and thank you, Secretary.
Hold on, I'm sorry.
Oops.
I'm sorry, I'm supposed to say, we're going to allow ABC 27 on the floor to do B-roll for the next 10 minutes. Sorry, go ahead, Representative Khan.
Thank you, Chairman Harris, and thank you, Madam Secretary, Acting Secretary, and for your staff for your work. And so I'm a product of public school, represent parts of Philadelphia, and we were talking about the adequacy gap, and I think the latest projection is statewide we've got about a $4.5 billion adequacy gap. And my county, Philadelphia County, which I'm proud to represent parts of, we have about a quarter of that in our district, about $1.25 billion. And I know that this money is critical because it goes to our teachers, like our teachers from PFT Local 9, PSEA, our Unite Here folks, the climate staff, the paraprofessionals, and psychologists. Can you talk about what you've heard regarding the impact of last year's adequacy gap funding? And are we doing enough? Are we going to get to where we need to in a timely manner, a manner where the schools that need it most are getting it?
Thank you for that question. And the impact has been immediate with this additional funding. We have seen school districts use this funding where they have hired additional staff members. A Northampton County school hired 2 additional social workers and a school psychologist. This is going to help those schools address social and emotional needs of their students. We've also seen school districts decide that they're going to open up additional special education classrooms within their school districts so that students aren't going to need to be educated outside of the school district, but rather can be part of the school community. Those types of things wouldn't be possible without this additional funding. I mentioned the dual credit program, being able to send students to college and have them see what it's like on a college campus. That's something that we've seen. Seeing changes to full-day kindergarten, right? Moving from half-day kindergarten to full-day kindergarten options. That is something that can really revolutionize a school district, and we're seeing all of those things happen in school districts around the Commonwealth.
Thank you. So when I went to Central and Greenburgh in Philadelphia, 255, we didn't actually have charter schools. They didn't exist. And I think since then, since I graduated from Central, we started to see an influx of charters in this space. And the budget for our schools, our public schools, which have constantly been sort of supporting these charter schools where before they hadn't. There used to be a line item where we would have a certain amount for charter schools and the rest for public schools. Now it's sort of just kind of comes out of the public schools budget. Can you talk about the importance of having some sort of reform, as is proposed in Governor Shapiro's budget, $8,000 capping for charter schools, especially in light of the report from the Auditor General about the need for reform based on the fact that I think 5 charter schools, I think they have close to $1 billion in revenues, and they've been putting a lot of that money away to buy, and they're buying buildings in their charter schools, they're cyber charter schools, they're virtual.
So we certainly need some reform. I think I might start with saying that charter schools and cyber charter schools, whether we're talking about brick and mortar or cyber, they are public schools. And these public schools are here to stay, and they do serve a purpose for students across the Commonwealth. So one of the things that we need to take a look at is how is the charter school law helping, and how is the charter school law currently harming school districts and those students who go to charter schools and cyber schools. And I think the governor's budget has taken a couple of steps in that direction. Last year, the governor proposed a cyber tuition change, and that change actually goes into effect, or went into effect in January, and is for this second half of the year. And it is proposed that that change in tuition cost for special education students attending cyber schools will save $95 million for school districts who are sending students. The change that's proposed for this budget of $8,000 per tuition or per student in tuition stands to save $378 million. This is something that will absolutely help school districts when that funding goes back into their budget, and certainly in the recent past, school districts have become much better at providing their own cyber educations as well.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman, Representative Krupa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the testifiers here today. During the governor's budget address on February 4th, he stated that he directed the budget secretary to conduct a comprehensive review of every program we offer in the Commonwealth and to identify inefficiencies and costs that can be eliminated. This initiative, known as REMAP, is incorporated in the budget proposal by sunsetting programs that are duplicative and don't work. I truly commend the governor, because if this exercise is done earnestly and not just some superficial exercise, it's a wonderful opportunity to identify and eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse. Madam Secretary, have you been part of this conversation and the review, discussions about the review of the Department of Education?
Absolutely.
Okay, and can you outline what plans there are for this review for your department?
Certainly. We're constantly reviewing our personnel to determine if we are right-sized. One thing I can tell you is that while the percent of work has steadily increased in the department, it has the work itself has outpaced the increase in the number of personnel that we have. So that is not an area where we perceive that we need to make any changes. But it's one of the things that we absolutely looked at. Another thing that we looked at, and there was a change made, is where our headquarters actually are. We previously were headquartered in a building that was rented in the Commonwealth, and we have moved into a building that is owned by the Commonwealth. And what a beautiful building it is. The restoration has been nothing short of amazing. But that change right there will save the Commonwealth quite a bit of money over time. So that's one change. And another change in that same vein that we undertook was to say that once we moved into that space, could we further consolidate so that other agencies could also share that space with us without impacting our operations? And we determined that indeed that could happen. And now we have another agency working in that building cooperatively with us. So that's just one example of how efficiency has been achieved.
So that's encouraging to hear that you're internally doing this. How is what the governor's proposing in this REMAP program different than what you're already doing internally?
Well, I think it's all part of that process. It's all part of taking a look at what efficiencies we can get out of the work that we're already doing.
So what I'm hearing is that there's this new initiative, at least with respect to the Department of Education, is nothing more than what you've already been doing.
No, I'm not suggesting that that's the case. I'm suggesting that those are some of the things that we've undertaken recently to increase efficiency.
So you've indicated that you've been part of the conversations with Governor Shapiro about the REMAP. I'm just asking and trying to get a handle on what additional steps are going to be done in this investigative process to determine where the belt can be tightened a little bit more.
I think what we're doing is taking a look at everything from where we are located and getting efficiencies there to the personnel that we employ and determine to what degree we can make changes and in what areas we can make changes, and also to look at the programs and initiatives that we foster at the department and determine if there's anything there that we want to either augment or we want to decrease. And all of that will help to get us to that more efficient state that you're suggesting is important, and I would agree with you.
So with all due respect, it's sounding like that this is just in the discussion stages of the REMAP and how it's going to apply to the Department of Education. Is there anything in writing or any specific written plan that's going to outline exactly what's going to be reviewed?
So REMAP is a pilot program. Right now, there are 3 specific agencies that are participating in that pilot program. They all submitted information on time. We are always at the table talking to the governor's office about ways we can be more efficient, especially as we go into negotiations in terms of appropriations, legislation that can be changed. We are constantly in conversations about ways that, going back to a previous question, ways that formulas can be better legislated so that money that's going out gets to where it needs to be. So we are not while we're not part of the pilot program, we are in plans to continue these conversations as we move forward.
So unfortunately, my time has expired. I would ask the chair to be included for any second round questions.
Thank the gentlelady. Representative Malagari.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. Appreciate your time here, Secretary Rowe, and really do appreciate your whole team and what they do for our Commonwealth. The governor's budget calls for $125 million for the Public School Facility Improvement Grant Program. I understand the critical need for these dollars. These maintenance dollars are extremely important. Both school districts that I represent in my district, North Penn School District and Souderton Area School District were awarded some of those first round dollars last year. In North Penn, they got a $575,000 HVAC upgrade project award for Penndale Middle School. And in Souderton Area School District, 2 different awards, $1 million awarded for HVAC upgrades and equipment replacement, and another $1 million awarded for West Broad Street Elementary School facility upgrades. As you know, these dollars are designed for smaller projects. And the PlanCon program that we have for major renovations are new buildings, and that has been closed since 2016. Can you share your view on school facility funding and how we should prioritize those limited funds and a balance between maintenance funding versus PlanCon?
Yeah, I think we absolutely need to have an eye on the facilities. We can't put all of the money that exists into one bucket and neglect at the same time the infrastructure that exists. And I think as we move forward and perhaps move out of a moratorium, I think it's important for us to get a good idea of what the breadth of issues are out there. What we saw with the facilities repair programs was that there is absolutely a need for this. Everything from HVAC to plumbing repairs, to roofs that are leaking when it rains outside. There was no shortage of projects that needed to be funded. But what I can't tell you is the breadth of the issue. I know that there's a lot, but I can't tell you how much exists and at what schools they exist. And so some type of study might be helpful in achieving that. And the department has worked with our federal partners related to a SASE grant, which I only remember because I think I really like the name. But the SASE grant allowed us to work with the highest needs schools and consider some of their needs and really some facilities studies, and then put some money towards making fixes. So if there's something to learn from that SASE grant, it is that facilities studies can be really important as we move forward.
Do you think that if we were to open PlanCon 2.0 that the department would be ready to administer that program? And how much state reimbursement would there be for a typical project if we were to do that?
I think the department is ready for the conversations. And once we begin those conversations and the legislature begins to move towards reopening, we will certainly ensure that we have the right personnel and the right teams prepared to address any of the uniquenesses associated with a PlanCon 2.
Okay, thank you. And switching gears real quick, 7.4% of school funding in Pennsylvania came from federal sources in 2022 and 2023, that school year. What programs does the federal funding support, and what would the impact to schools be if that funding were cut? And just for an example, in North Penn School District, that share of federal funding is 2.11%, and in Souderton, it's about 1.5% for their federal share.
Well, federal funding definitely varies based on the school district. But to say what would happen if federal funding were removed, it would be nothing short of catastrophic. That funding helps our most vulnerable students and keeps a lot of our programs moving. We're talking somewhere in the area of $1 billion in title funds and perhaps another $600 million related to IDEA funds. And if that were suddenly removed from schools' budget, it would be catastrophic.
Would this cause a tax increase back home?
I can't see how it wouldn't, but I generally don't deal in hypotheticals.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Kale.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Rowe, for being here today. I'm going to start off by asking some broader questions in hopes that this afternoon I'll be able to ask a few more questions in the second session. It seems like every year during budget season, we have a discussion in the House chamber about education funding. And we're talking about big numbers, and usually there's actually some bipartisan support. I know in our caucus, we have been supportive of education increases over the course of the last 6 years since I've been here, and I'm sure much longer than that. And of course, across the aisle, there have been supports for that as well. The questions then drill down into particular school districts and areas and grant programs. But my question to you here today is, what is your department doing to ensure, I know we all have this common goal of providing a great education for every student across the Commonwealth. What are we doing to ensure that that money is actually going towards that? And how are we ensuring that schools and school districts across the Commonwealth are implementing programs to ensure that we reach our goals here in Harrisburg?
Well, I think the Ready to Learn block grant is a great example of what you're talking about. I think you're talking about accountability. How do we know that the money that we've set aside and for the reasons that are listed in the law, how do we know that it is actually going to support those types of programs? And the short answer is monitoring. When schools are given their allocation amount, that is, they tell us how it is that they will spend those funds. Once those rationales are reviewed and approved, then the funds are sent to the school district to use in accordance with what they've suggested. Then on the fall, after the money is used, there is a funding report where they indicate how indeed they actually spent it. So on the one side, it's projecting how they will spend, and then at the end, it's how did you spend it? And that's how we're able to give all of you examples of how the money was used in the most recent funding cycle.
And there's 400 or 500 school districts in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and we could talk about whether we should have less or more and have that discussion. But certainly, I'm sure that there are school districts that don't use the funding correctly or don't get results as far as student performance. What type of consequences do we have for those school districts that aren't performing well?
What types of consequences do we have for schools that aren't performing well?
Will funding be cut from those school districts? Is there any type of consequence for failing students?
Actually, what we do when we find that schools aren't performing well is we lean in. We say, what is most likely to be causing a school to underperform? Try to get to the root cause of that issue, and often there's more than one particular issue, and then create an action plan with them to move forward, so that working through their action plan, we can actually see demonstrable changes.
And I appreciate that, and certainly it shouldn't just be cut immediately. There should be an action plan. There ought to be means of ensuring that they have a path to success. But when this keeps continuing year after year after year after year within a particular school district, at some point, is there any type of consequence to ensure that parents are getting the best for their children in education?
I think part of the consequence would be the school board determining that whatever individual is in charge may need to be changed. So there's definitely a local element to that as well. But we're not in the business necessarily of punitive measures to remove funding from schools who are underperforming. If we perceive that schools who are underperforming need additional resources to reduce classroom sizes or have full-day kindergarten or have resources that they can have a warm, welcoming environment, then removing funding from them would fly in the face of that logic.
And removing funding may not be the right answer. I'm just curious if there is some sort of other means that we can ensure a quality education for students, and that may be one of them, but if we're seeing these problems sometimes decades after decades, what can we do to ensure that our tax dollars are being spent wisely?
Yeah, I think working within the ESSA state plan to ensure that schools that are underperforming, perhaps who are in the lowest 5% in the state, receive a designation of comprehensive school improvement. And through that school improvement, we are working with them and making sure that we're investing human capital to identify those root causes.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Thank the gentleman. Representative Mullins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Madam Secretary, thank you for being here. We know that executive functioning skills like planning and time management and note-taking are keys to success in your academic life and in your professional life beyond. But we also know, and I've heard from small businesses and larger employers and teachers at higher levels that many students and prospects lack those skills. I'm still a work in progress, admittedly, but I have a two-part question. Is this regularly and consistently taught in schools? And is it your belief that this should be regularly taught in schools?
Yeah, you mentioned planning and note-taking. I want to throw out typing. I think my most under-celebrated teacher in high school was my typing teacher. I owe that lady a debt of gratitude.
You know, I like that. Mrs. Weston, if you happen to be watching this in your now retired life, I think of you often.
Indeed. So as far as note-taking and planning, absolutely. Those are key skills that students should be engaged in, and it absolutely will benefit them throughout their schooling moving forward. We should be engaging in those skills as we teach the state standards. We can incorporate those things.
Thank you so much.
Representative Alsumer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here and your testimony today. Secretary Rowe, I want to thank you specifically for coming up on your recent visit, touring Wallenpaupack High School in my district, the 139th. I should point out there are 3 other great high schools up there besides Wallenpaupack: Western Wayne, Wayne Highlands, and Delaware Valley as well. As you know, 65 other counties in the Commonwealth have comprehensive CTE centers. Wayne and Pike counties are the only 2 in the Commonwealth without comprehensive CTE. This puts Wayne and Pike County students at a significant disadvantage. Our local public schools perform at high levels academically. That is great for those who want to go on to further their higher education. However, with comprehensive CTE center, with no comprehensive CTE center, this greatly reduces the economic opportunity for students who want to learn skills of trades, nursing, med tech, technology, and much more. Our families, our local businesses are losing the opportunity to keep families together, develop workforce for our businesses to help drive our economy. We want the statewide CTEs to be successful. Wayne and Pike County want to be able to catch up and unlock our future. To that end, the department's budget proposes a career and technical education appropriation of $149.6 million, an increase of $5.5 million over the prior year, or an additional 3.8%. Most of this appropriation funds the Career and Technical Subsidy, which provides state funding for career and technical education programs at school districts and in career technical centers across the state, However, it funds other CTE programs as well. How will the increase be divided? Is it primarily for the subsidy or other supporting programs?
I think there's a combination of both things. There's also an increase related to equipment grants. And to Wallenpaupack in particular, as I mentioned before, I had the great fortune of visiting the school and hearing about their plans for potentially having a comprehensive CTC in the future. You wouldn't know that they were disadvantaged in any way in this area because of the fantastic work that the school board and the superintendent has done there to provide CTE in the school itself. It is really nothing short of amazing. They had an entire aviation set up in a classroom where they were able to take real-time weather and practice both taking off and landing planes. It was really something to behold. So funding, as you mentioned, $5.5 million increase there, and also additional funding for equipment grants.
The budget materials state that the Pennsylvania Department of Education is focused on improving the quality of CTE programs by ensuring equity in programs and expanding career pathways that support multiple exit and reentry opportunities. Can you give us some specific examples of how the department plans on accomplishing this?
One example is the recent addition of a program for general education. It's a pathway that is allowing high school students to earn valuable skills towards becoming a teacher. I should say also that in Delaware County, there is a school district where students can earn 38 dual credit credits, dual enrollment credits, towards becoming a teacher while they're in high school. And if you couple that with the CTC, you really have a great pathway moving forward that can even help with affordability in college.
Thank you very much. Look forward to working with you in Wayne and Pike County as well.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Bellman.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being here. Secretary Rowe, there's an appropriation in PDE's budget called Safe Driving Course. The proposed level is about $1.1 million. And can you talk a little bit about PDE's role in driver and safety education and how this money is used?
So the department does have a subsidy where school districts that partake in safe driving and have instructors receive a portion of that funding to help offset their costs.
All right, and do you have any statistics on how many school entities are providing driver education programming?
Good question. Nope, I looked at my colleagues and I don't have that, but I can get back to you.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. I have another question too. It's about school libraries. State funding support for libraries has not kept pace with inflation. What are you hearing from our library partners about their needs and funding challenges?
Libraries are absolutely an essential part of any community's ecosystem. And they do more in public libraries than one would expect. Of course, they help with literacy, and they help with introduction to literacy as well by having families come and do readings there. But they also help bridge the gap with technology, where individuals who don't necessarily have the skills needed to enter the workforce related to technology can come for different workshops. A lot of workforce development needs like resume help and job search resources and career counseling also happen in libraries. Community resilience and emergency services are often centered in libraries as an information hub. So it can't be understated how important libraries are to the functioning of any community. And naturally, we'd like to see our libraries well-funded and thriving. Part of that is the governor's planned budget proposal of $70 million to libraries.
Thank you. And now I have a question about school facilities. Can you explain how our current contracting requirements are affecting completion timelines and costs for traditional public schools renovations?
How contracting
requirements are affecting completion timelines.
Do you have an idea about contracting?
Specifically, we would have to get back to you. Our school environmental repairs program, we've required, a 50%. We paid 50% up front of the state share, but we're requiring schools that receive that money to produce proof that the project was completed before they get their second half of that payment. And I believe we've paid out a good bit of the final payment. So schools are providing us with proof that they've completed those projects. In terms of the large portion of dollars that's on the DCED side, we definitely have to follow up with our colleagues in DCED.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. And one more question, because I'm new on the Appropriations Committee, so I just wanted to see if y'all could help me out with this. In regards to charter schools and school facilities, are charter schools allowed to access funding for renovations for their brick and mortar?
I don't know if they were part of, actually, I do know. Yes, brick and mortar absolutely were part of the school improvement funding that PDE put out last year.
Okay, so they are. Okay. All right. Thank you. I know my time is getting short, but thank you. I appreciate it, and thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Representative Marcel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you for joining us this morning. I wanted to follow some of the questions and comments that my colleague had about career and technical education. Since I sat on my local board years back, it is an area that's very important to me. I'm really pleased that we've been able to work on a lot of education issues since I've been a member of the past 2 years. But I will say that I'm hopeful that maybe there is some work in CTE that we can be focused on in this upcoming session. Generally, I think there are a few issues that I think need to be addressed that I'm going to talk about. The first is that I was a little bit disappointed to see that the increase for CTE was only 3.8% for this year. I think that given the wait list conversation that we've had, there is a lot of work that can be done there. So I'm hopeful that that number will rise. We did talk a little bit about wait list previously, and I appreciate the comments about the fact that that needs to be addressed. The Middle Bucks Institute of Technology, which is in my district and where I was a board member previously, they've had a 21% increase since 2016. And so when we talk about that someone may not be getting their first, second, all those choices, for some of the students that are not being able to go potentially to that school, they may be missing out on what they are going to be passionate about. I actually had a student come up to me a couple years ago and said he did not enjoy school until he went to that program. And so I am laser focused on this because I really think that it's an area that we need to address, and that we really need to make sure that we are connecting students with these professions and this training that they're interested in. For the first time ever, I've actually had people reach out to me this year asking me if I can help to get their kids into MBIT, almost like the way that like a college type of atmosphere it would be. And so my question for you is that, does the department have data on wait lists across our career and technical education centers across the state? I know that I gave a number for MBIT, but do you collect that information?
I actually don't know if our Bureau of Career and Education collects that funding. I know it has been a point of conversation that I've had with regularity with that team, and it seems to me that they have a pulse on that number, but whether or not it is specifically collected, I don't know the answer to that.
Is that something that you could?
Oh, absolutely. That goes without saying. I will look into that for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then I would just follow up to just say that I appreciate that you're looking at ways to increase access to the programs and to figure it out, because I know that locally in Bucks County, all of our CTCs have wait lists. And so I appreciate it, but I also want to impress upon you I think there's a lot of urgency to this, and that, when people start talking about doing, oh, well, we can build a new building. Well, that takes a long time to get the funding figured out. There are a lot of things that take years, and meanwhile, there are a number of students that are missing out on being able to participate in those programs. Second of all is, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about the competitive equipment grants. I saw that was flat funded, but we know that there's a desire, there's a need to make sure that all of these schools that have these wait lists have the appropriate equipment in them. And so I was wondering if you keep data on, are there usually more requests for that funding than the grants that are available? Is it similar to a wait list, essentially? Do we have more schools asking for those equipment grants that aren't receiving the funds?
Yes, there's always more need than there is supply.
And do you have metrics on that, or is that something that can be provided to the committee?
We absolutely have metrics on that. When school districts, school districts could do it, but also CTCs express their interest in our e-grant system, the total request is captured, the amount of money that they're actually given in the end is captured, and then those who make a request but the funds are not given to them at all, we also have that as well. So we can certainly give that to you.
I appreciate that, and I hope that after seeing that data, and maybe others on the committee seeing that is an area that we try to make sure that we're ensuring proper funding of. And then I know that I'm running out of time. I look forward to asking questions this afternoon, but I also just want to let you know I'll also be talking to you about just overall the certification process for CTCs and maybe how we can eliminate or make it a little bit easier for some of our folks that want to go into that. So thank you.
Yes, I'll look forward to it.
Thank the gentlelady. Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Great to see you, Dr. Rowe. Congratulations to you. I have a couple of questions today. My first one is about structured literacy. As you know, we passed a bill last year on a bipartisan basis to encourage structured literacy, and while we are going to come back and see if we can get more heft and dedicated funding, first question is, does PDE have any idea of how many districts use structured literacy as opposed to another way to teach reading, especially in the early grades, say K through 3?
Now, all school districts are supposed to make the change to structured literacy. The rate at which they do that seems to vary,
sure.
Much to my consternation, because I do think that structured literacy is, let's say, the second most important thing in schools. If the most important thing would be the health, safety, and welfare of students, then the second thing would be to have structured literacy be in every classroom that literacy is taught in. That's how strongly I think that this should be in place. I can say that we don't have necessarily a direct method of determining how many school districts are utilizing structured literacy and how many have made the change already. We have indirect measures based on how money that we send, like the adequacy funding, is being used. So we can begin to deduce it that way.
Excellent. And just to be clear, I mean, the adequacy funding, the Ready to Learn block grant, those are permitted uses for, you know, curriculum development, professional development, and things like that for structured literacy, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the department has a free structured literacy course that's available on our SAS website. Patan, one of our partners that's in charge of professional development, they have a course as well. So this doesn't need to be something that is onerous related to cost. We're attempting to make this as budget-friendly as possible.
Excellent. And I really do appreciate you hearing your support. I'm a big advocate for structured literacy. And of course, like I said, we're going to try and pour more resources into that. My second question is around early intervention. You know, when I was a child advocate, I know, you know, I had the great pleasure of advocating for high quality pre-K, high quality childcare and early intervention. And I'm just wondering, from my understanding, there was, you know, early intervention gets increases as long as there are additional children who need that service. But I'm just wondering, how do you begin to formulate what that increase looks like? Is it projections from the IUs and the school districts, and then Octel takes a crack at you know, how that increase comes about, or just I just want some more clarity around how you begin to make that ask or that request for early intervention funding.
Right. So right now, related to pre-K counts, we know that that the number of seats that exist is serving, or we have approximately 91% of those seats filled.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. You asked me about early intervention.
Early intervention, yes.
Great.
Yeah, I mentioned pre-K in my advocacy. I'm sorry.
Oh,
yeah,
no
sorry.
problem.
I didn't mean to confuse you, Dr. Rowe.
But
yeah, early intervention. How do we determine that increase that we need for early intervention?
Yeah.
Apologies.
Nope, that's fine. I got saved up here, or I'd have been way down the track on that one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, early
Director
intervention.
Brown.
Certainly, we meet with those who are doing the work, who are expressing what the work looks like, what they're hearing in the field, and then working with our partners at Octel to determine what increases might be necessary.
Is there, and I'm sorry, I hate to, I really want to try and understand this. Is there a projection that you use and say, okay, we serve this number of students, we can project, because unfortunately it's a growth area, so.
Sure, so actually, and good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So yes, you're right. So what it is it's actually a proposed number. So as we move into the future, so looking at our future budget, it will be the proposed number, and we work with all of our early intervention providers to come up with that proposed number. And
Okay.
we've seen a significant amount of growth.
Right.
So during the pandemic, we've seen the numbers kind of fall.
Sure.
We're actually starting to near those pre-pandemic numbers. And so that's what we do. We use our proposed model, but we use our early intervention providers to be able to do that based off the numbers that they have the prior year.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarity, Dr. Brown. Thank you, Dr. Rowe, and congratulations again. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank the gentleman, Representative Barton.
Thank you, Chairman Harris, and thank you for being here, Secretary Rowe, and your esteemed panel. I have data here from the Pennsylvania Department of Education on the general fund balance of the state's 500 school districts taken from their annual financial reports. And so, in layman's terms, right, this is the district's savings accounts. Tells us that in 2010, 2011, districts' total savings totaled $3.3 billion. Now, 12 years later, 2022-23, which is the latest year I have available anyway, that total had risen to $6.8 billion. It's more than doubled. What do you think that tells us about our collective fiscal condition of our school districts?
Well, I would think that we'd need to be careful about drawing too many conclusions, because the each school district would have a different rationale for why they would have additional funds. I think it's, at least on the surface, a very positive thing that school districts have increased balances, particularly when they need to sometimes front funding when they're waiting for example, the state budget to be passed. They also need to be particularly concerned related to their facilities, and where ESSER funding has allowed them some breathing room, it's distinctly possible that that has freed up other funds. So I think there's a lot of different rationales that if we talked to different schools across the Commonwealth that we would find for why they have increases there.
Let me change things up a little bit, Madam Secretary. And I hear from time to time that, and you may also, that our public school system is failing our children. And let's be very candid, the decline of the nuclear family has resulted in a lack of learning in our homes. The children growing up in homes, in single-parent homes or maybe foster homes across the Commonwealth and across the country. It's a different type of family atmosphere than years gone by. So we can argue that our schools aren't failing our children, but our families are failing our children. And specifically in things like work ethic and finance and discipline and chores and leadership and kindness. And I guess my question is, if our children, if we recognize that many families lack parental mentoring, yet we don't teach leadership in school, and if children aren't attending a worship service, should we continue to keep God out of our schools? And if we give students a free breakfast or free lunch, but we're not teaching them how to cook and how to buy groceries, and we recognize that districts are poor and below the poverty line, but we're not teaching children about personal finances. So, Secretary, my question is, do we need more money, or do we need to change what we're teaching the children and the way we're teaching the children?
Again, a lot in that question, and certainly one of the things that comes to mind is that as long as there's math tests in schools, God will be there and so will prayer, right? And I kind of hear in that the adage of teach a person to fish as opposed to just giving the fish. So I agree with you. We need to teach the skills that are going to lead to self-sufficiency. And we had someone ask about something that is seemingly as simple as note-taking and planning, but is of paramount importance as somebody moves not only through their schooling career, but also into life itself. So I think we agree on a lot about needing to concern ourselves with the skills that we determine are most important to be taught in school. I think I also heard you mention personal finance. And in the 2026-27 school year, I believe, is when personal finance is going to be a high school mandate. So we're taking those steps that are needed to make sure that students are taught the things that we perceive as a leadership team, along with you, are the most important.
Thank you. My time's up. Chairman Harris, I'll just ask if there's an opportunity for more time this afternoon. I'd certainly like to be added to that. Thank you, sir.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Siegel.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here today, as well as your team, and thanks for spending the whole day with us today. Look, we've talked a lot in this chamber today, frankly, about cost, right? And I think all too often in this body, we are really good at zeroing in on a direct expenditure, the direct cost of doing something. But all too often, I think what we fail to do is acknowledge the cost of not doing things, the indirect cost of not investing in ourselves and our system. And I think there's no better example of that than the state of early childhood education here in the Commonwealth. And I just want to work with you as we break that down, and in my opinion, 3 distinct facets: the way we treat early childhood educators, the impact that that has on families in the Commonwealth, and more broadly, the impact it has on our society and our economy. And I'll start first with the early childhood educators themselves, 50% of whom say they will likely leave the field in the next 5 years. And these are some of the best educated folks we have in our education system. 20% have a master's degree, 39% hold a bachelor's degree, but here's the kicker: they make $12.50 an hour on average, and nearly 50% of them rely on public benefits. 21% need SNAP, 21% need Medicaid to get by. So can you talk a little bit about how we are failing, frankly, the folks that are on the front line of preparing our young children to be good model citizens, to get good jobs and have the skills they need to succeed in our education system?
I think that I can. Now do I get to talk about pre-K?
Yes.
All right.
We got to it. We got to it.
I applaud your knowledge of those statistics and their application here. You're absolutely right that it is not just about what we spend money on, but what we fail to spend money on that matters. And Governor Shapiro's budget this year calls for an increase to the amount dedicated to each pre-K count seat. That funding is going to be used to help offset the expenditures to the salaries of the teachers that you're suggesting are underpaid. The guidance would be that they're paid a similar amount to their school district peers, so that we're not having attrition issues, we're not having retention issues. They're not saying, I really love what I do here in this environment, but I'm going to take a school district position because that's where I'm going to get my family sustaining wage. But Governor Shapiro's budget allows those salaries to be increased so that they can access, or they can continue to teach in that place, access benefits and the like.
I thank you for that answer, and I concur with you. And I think we need to make sure there's parity between our early childhood educators and the salary that they could earn in a traditional K-12 education system. I think it's deplorable in what it says about our society that the folks that we are tasking with shaping young minds earn such a pittance of wages that they literally need public benefits to survive. Let's move on to the consequence for Pennsylvania families. We talk so often in this body about reducing cost for Pennsylvania families, the cost of living here in our Commonwealth and our country, and here's the reality. It costs 17.5% of the median Pennsylvania income to put a child into infant child care in the Commonwealth. It's an exorbitant sum of money. I've been a long believer that we should have universal child care here in our country and our Commonwealth, or at the very least cap it at 7% of a family's income. The Economic Policy Institute concluded that if we capped the cost of child care here in the Commonwealth at 7% of a family's income, we would save the average Pennsylvania family $6,300 a year in expenses, money that could be spent on groceries feeding those children, transportation costs to get them to and from other activities, or hey, just getting by in their life. Can you talk a little bit about the indirect cost of not funding our system of early childhood education to Pennsylvania families?
Yeah, I think we just take everything you said and flip it the other way to say that investments in early childhood pay off almost immediately. Investments that allow parents to go to work, and instead of saying that they can't afford to put their child in care, and know in advance that care that they're putting them in is quality. And when you don't do that, you see the downstream effects of that almost immediately. So investing early not only helps the child, him or herself, to be ready to access schooling throughout the rest of their career, to be more ready for that, I should say, but it also has the positive economic effects that you mentioned in your question.
Mr. Chairman, I see I have 30 seconds, but could you just humor me while I end with the final part of my questioning? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to move on. I did say I think the biggest cost, as we started with, was the cost of not doing something. And it's been well documented that the current state of early childhood education, our Commonwealth, costs us $6.6 billion a year in the form of lost wages, lost time. People report being fired or reprimanded by their employers because they literally have to choose between taking care of their children and doing their job. And here's the kicker: 68% of all Pennsylvanian children have all of their full-time caregivers engaged in the workforce. That's according to a pre-K count study. So I think really what we're doing as a Commonwealth is failing our families. Our families are doing everything right. They're working their asses off to support themselves and their children, and we're failing them, in my opinion. We are not doing our service as a Commonwealth to make sure that they have the resources they need to succeed. So can you just talk a little bit about how when we don't invest in a adequately funded early childhood education system, we cost the Commonwealth money, and we ultimately underchange and shortchange Pennsylvania families?
I'm looking at a red light. Okay. I do think that ultimately, if we don't invest in early childhood, we are leaving families and children behind. And given the state of Pennsylvania, given the things that families are facing, we can't afford to leave anyone behind as we move forward to ensure that our economy is where we need it to be.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Representative DeVanzo.
Thank you, Chairman Harrison. Thank you, David, Chairman Rowe, for being here today. I'm sorry, Secretary Rowe, I'm sorry. What I want to discuss is the public schools facilities improvement line. The governor's given another $25 million. We'll do $125 million. A specific line item, and there's a Solar for Schools program. Is that a program that the Department of Education supports and advocates for?
It is something that we would support any technical assistance or and provide any resources that are necessary, but that particular program isn't something that's within the Department of Education.
Yeah, correct. It falls DCED or CFA, I believe. So it is something that you guys support, correct? You guys would advocate for?
As far as advocate for, I can see the benefits related to teaching students about alternate energy sources and providing technical assistance related to the program itself.
Okay, but as far as there's no study out there that shows that putting solar panels on the rooftops of schools, that child gets a better education, correct?
I think I can safely agree that there's no study that says if you put a solar panel on your roof, students will do better.
All right, so this program then, you know, we're taking an additional $25 million, and we're kind of taking away from education. We're putting it in the solar panels, so to speak. Do you know how much of that money out of the 125 would, is there a specific line that's like designated for solar? Any ratio by any chance?
I don't know the answer to the ratio, but what I can say is that the governor's proposal isn't solely about education. There is a more global impact, and there are a lot of competing reasons why one would move forward with something like a solar program.
Yeah, there's a recent study, the Penn Environmental Report, 91% of Pennsylvania schools have lead pipes. Students are getting contaminated lead exposures. I'm just wondering why, and I think we would all agree, right? Getting lead pipes out of our schools is more important than putting solar panels on the rooftops here.
I think they are both important. I would agree with you that getting lead out of our water and asbestos out of the floors and the walls so that students have a safe and healthy learning environment is of utmost importance.
Yeah, my main concern with these solar panels is, and we've heard it here this morning all the way across the board, funding. We just can't get enough money. And So when these solar panels go onto the rooftops, in 20 years, when these panels whenever their time's up or they're expired, do we have any idea who's going to pay to remove these panels? Will this cost go back onto the taxpayers?
Well, I think what we want to consider is the fact that the solar panels proposed are to reduce the cost of implementing solar energy for schools. And the specifics of the guidance and guidelines for this program, I think, may be better addressed by DCED.
We had mentioned cutting cost. Do you guys, I couldn't find anything that showed there's actually a cost savings with these solar panels. Do you guys have anything that you could share with us?
Again, I think this might be something that's better addressed with DCED, but when you take something that is naturally occurring and are able to capture it and convert it using the solar panels, and thereby you need less of something that you have to pay for as a commodity, you will just by that logic and by its rationale reduce the costs.
Yeah, I think getting back to my point, the concern is the removal of these panels. We're seeing people that when their panels are done at their home, they're taking them out, taking them to the garbage. These panels are full of nickel. That nickel's getting into everybody's water systems, and we're seing contamination there.
I appreciate your concern with the environment, and I absolutely share your concern. I would assume that the guidance that DCED has would address what happens at the end of life.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Harris.
Thank you, gentlemen. Representative Webster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Rowe, thank you and your team for a long day, and appreciate that very much. I've got a couple of questions in different columns, if you will, that my colleagues have approached already, and Rep. Fleming spoke very eloquently about early intervention. I wanted to connect a couple of dots and then ask a question, and in that regard, like we said, structured literacy, and then we said early intervention. And I want you to know that the adequacy funds over the past year enabled Norristown School District, or my district, to hire, I think the number is 28 reading specialists in that same category. So the connectivity of that really plays out. I also notice, the increase this year, 16 million, I think, as you said in your formal testimony, but the budget also includes 14 million or so as a supplement to the current school year. And that plays back to the discussion we had about how do we project what's really required. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that part of sort of, I think it's an annual thing that we actually have to supplement the budget in this regard?
You're asking about how we project increases for the adequacy supplement, or for which
So early intervention is really the question.
For early intervention.
Yeah.
I think that question may be best answered by Shantae Brown.
Yeah.
Sure. So as I shared with Rep. Fleming earlier, the early intervention increases, the way that we look at those numbers is it's actually a model. So we would look at the years prior numbers and work with our early intervention providers to really come up with the numbers that they will be serving, and then put that number together as a totality. So that's the formula for EI. And I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, like if you're asking about how we come up with that proposed number.
Yes, that's
Okay.
what I'm asking, because it really is clear in the school districts that I represent that we're putting in more classrooms and we're adding teachers because the extent of the requirement is growing.
So we are asking for more data from these providers to get those numbers a little bit more earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So I would encourage any of the EI providers that are experiencing increased service and having to do increased services that they share that with their early intervention specialists. And they have started to see that. So that's how we're able to take that number and put together the proposed number, because we're having these ongoing conversations. But we're also asking that all of our providers tell us about what's going on in their districts, so that we can start to put these numbers together a little bit more earlier than we have in the past.
All right,
but
thanks
they
for that.
absolutely can do that.
Yeah, thanks for that. Mr. Chairman, I almost said break. That's sort of an Air Force thing. Completely different topic. Rep. Bellman also addressed libraries, and I wanted to touch base there. Libraries have had, I think, I've said this over the last 3 or 4 years, and my time on the Appropriations Committee, the impact personally to librarians and libraries has been dramatic in my experience. And I know we talk a little bit about libraries in our schools, but let's talk about our public libraries. What can we do? How do we support that increased thing that, again, connecting the dots? We've talked about how that helps our youngest learners, and then over a lifetime of learning, how impactful that is also for public libraries.
Yeah, I think, again, part of your question really is the answer. It's about the lifetime of learning. It's about Commonwealth Public Libraries being part of the ecosystem of a functioning community. Their importance can't be understated, and part of what we need to do is to fund them commensurately when the work that they do is of vital importance to our workforce development, to social services supports, to technology-related issues with maker spaces and 3D printers and learning things like that, so that people can be not only creative but also productive with their new skills in the workforce. This is something that is to be prized, and commensurate pay should follow.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great to see you here today, Madam Secretary. I know you've been here in past years. It's nice to see you steering the ship, so to speak. And my questions today for the first part, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity for a second round this afternoon. I appreciate you being here. Really, each of those time frames are going to center on safety and student safety. You know, I have 7 kids. They all attend public school. And all of them have relied on busing to be able to get them to and from schools. And there's been an ongoing dispute between charters, brick and mortar charters, and some of our public schools, where public schools are refusing to provide equal funding yellow bus transportation for charter school students. And so I'd like to dig into this a little bit more. You know, specifically the Wilkinsburg School in Pittsburgh refused to do that. And in fact, they gave the PAT buses, public bus passes, to the families who won the lottery and elected to attend one of those charter schools. And this includes elementary kids. You know, 2024, the Penn Hill School District did a similar task where they bused kids going to Penn Hills, but then they made other kids walk. It was in the news, about a 45-minute walk along Frankstown Road, which is a really busy highway. We have transportation funding. Can you touch a little bit about your thoughts on equal transportation between public school kids in a district and charter school kids in that same district?
Yeah, your rather straightforward question belies the difficulty inherent in the answer, particularly as it relates to charter school law. Charter school law is something that I think most people would agree needs to be updated. It was something that was created around the year 2000 and hasn't really been touched since then.
Yeah, so, and I recognize Supreme Court, lots of courts are weighing in over the law, but like more specifically, those kids, many of them would have to, elementary kids taking a bus and then having to go to the common like bus depot and transfer to another bus to get to their school. In this same street, like 4 or 5 days ago, there was a student that was shot. Now, that was a high school student, but as Secretary of Education, like, to have elementary or middle school students on public buses to go and have to do a transfer to get to school every day to and from. I mean, I'm with you 100%. You said the most important thing is health, safety, and welfare of students. But this dispute is going on specifically about 2,800 students, 1,100 of them are elementary school students, 450 in play right now. You know, would you support either a legislative change or your office doing a clarification, an interim, because the school districts are keeping the transportation money they're receiving, and then, can you touch on that?
Yeah, and perhaps I was too long-winded in my answer, but this really is a legislative issue. It seems simple, and even the way you posed the question, you said yellow bus, right? Which is what we all think about with school transportation, but that is not what the law actually says. The law says transportation, and that is something that we can't mandate. We don't have the flexibility as an agency. We would require a legislative change in order to make that.
Well,
and that's what the courts have determined as well.
When I hear you say transportation, and we do control transportation, particularly in funding. I mean, in my eyes, I see billions of dollars, a couple of billion more in the last 2 years. How much are we pushing to address funding for school district transportation, specifically specialized funding or including specialized funding for the special needs students? Because it seems like this fight is not like Wilkinsburg wants to cast these students aside. They're saying they don't have enough money. So how, like this budget, we could address the funding issue. Your thoughts?
I would absolutely welcome the conversation and welcome any changes that would allow us to be more responsive to the health, safety, and welfare of students as they're transported.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Curry.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon. Secretary Rowe, good to see you and the whole team here. I think the last time I saw you was at our Student Outcomes Committee meeting for education a couple weeks ago. And at that time, we were having a lot of conversation with that panel about what student outcomes really look like. And so, you know that in the past I have called you and asked about that, and I'll be talking to you a little bit more later this afternoon. But right now I want to kind of talk about a great program that was looked at last year and funded, but not fully funded, and that would be the student stipend. So I know that the student stipends have created a wonderful pipeline for student teachers to feel like they are valued in this, this education field. Do you know how many student teacher stipend applications were received? I know you're not FIA. I'm talking to you. I know, I'm talking to you as PDE, because I know that you have some type of influence on how this looks in those cabinet meetings. And I just want to just approach what you think about or can estimate about how many teachers were funded, and what are some of the repercussions of not fully funding the program from PDE's perspective. And then lastly, how has that impacted schools and individual student teachers in terms of not fully funding it for equitable opportunities? So I know that was a lot at you at one time, but I really want to talk about the equity of it all for those who were able to get online and get that application in, and those that were cut off and now don't have the opportunity, and how important it is that we fully fund student stipends.
Well, I think the governor's proposal and what was enacted in the past of $20 million was an excellent start, and we couldn't know how popular it would it would actually turn out to be. And you mentioned that some students were able to get on right away and were able to receive a stipend, and others were not, because it turns out that the amount was insufficient. We created something akin to a student-teacher stipend Hunger Games, as it were. And seeing the popularity of this program and seeing how much it actually assists students, student teachers as they go into the profession, the governor saw fit to increase in his proposal this year by another $20 million, doubling that to $40 million. And we are then closing in on the total amount of students that we have that are going through, approximately 5,500 students over the course of one school year, or one fiscal year, I suppose, and somewhere around 2,000 to 2,500 per semester. So we have a rough idea of how many students are going through, and at a cost of $10,000 per student, and then that additional funding for high needs locations. So we are definitely closing in on being able to fully fund this so that every student teacher doesn't have to work a second job, doesn't have to take on additional debt, doesn't have to rely on money that they received while they were working as a student previously.
Right.
And that's going to make a difference.
And there it is. Thank you for your advocacy for that, and I appreciate your continued advocacy to get fully funded for student teacher stipends. Thank you.
Thank the gentlelady, Representative Warner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Rowe, for being here today. I want to follow up on earlier questioning from Representative Barton. And in his questioning, he mentioned that in 2010 and 2011, that districts had a savings totaled of $3.3 billion. And each year since, we've increased education funding, and that in 2023, 2024, that fund balance had increased to $6.8 billion. So I guess my first question is do you have access to any more recent data that would tell us if that fund balance has grown more in 2023, 2024?
When school districts' AFRs are completed and sent to the department, they're published on our website. And at that point, we would have access to the information for what the fund balances are in the current year.
Okay. Do you happen to know how many school districts make up that fund balance? In other words, how many districts have reserve balances?
Well, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. And so then, I don't know if you know the answer to this one, but in the governor's proposal, then do you happen to know the dollar amount of funding that the districts that have a fund balance are going to receive?
You're asking how many schools who have
So the schools,
a fund balance.
that make up the $6.8 million that we know right now, the schools that make up the $6.8 million, do you happen to know how much more money they are going to receive in the governor's proposed budget?
No, I don't think I can answer it.
See, that's a little troubling to me that we don't know this information, because I have school districts in my county that can't afford basic supplies and basic necessities like heating and HVAC systems. The problem I have is that this has grown from $3.3 billion to $6.8 billion. So you have school districts sitting on $6.8 billion when you have others across this Commonwealth that would love to have $6.8 as a reserve balance in their funding. Do you have any thoughts on what we can do to make that more equal across the state? I have some ideas, but I'd like to hear from you, Madam Secretary.
Sure. First, let me say I share your concern about schools that don't have funding and need that funding not only for direct student benefit, but also for facility maintenance and for safety of students. That is a difficult position for any superintendent, school board, and community to be in. and I'm not callous to the difficulties that you and your constituents are facing. Related to the $6.8 billion, the gentleman wasn't saying that school districts had $6.8 billion on average in their fund balance, rather that all fund balances of all school districts across the Commonwealth added to that increase of $6.8 billion.
That's correct, and that's the information I was looking at. Out of those schools that make up the $6.8 billion, how much more will they be receiving in funds this year? Because here's what I'm trying to get to, right? Let me just lay it out flat.
Okay.
Okay, you have school districts that are putting away money and have money in savings while other school districts are still struggling to get by. So that's what I'm saying. This is information we should know. If there are schools, because it went from 3.3, we've increased education funding every year. Now it's at 6.8. So in other words, school districts are getting money from the state and putting it in a savings account, basically saving that money, putting aside while other school districts don't have enough for basic necessities. This is very important information. And frankly, I don't see how we could even begin to talk about budgeting for education without knowing that information.
Again, I can appreciate what your concern is. I think you might be mischaracterizing.
I don't think it's a mischaracterization at all.
We can agree to disagree on that point. The AFRs are currently, are not available at the present time, but when they are available, we can certainly show you where that is on our website so that you can do a more in-depth analysis, or if you would prefer, you can reach out to the department and we can do that for you. But with the AFRs not currently available, it's not something that I can provide to you off the top of my head, and I certainly don't want to guess. I can also tell you that school districts keep on average, if possible, no more than 8% in their fund balances. 8% of their expenditures, that is, and they can't have more than they can't have more than 8% in their fund balances if they need to go to referendums. So that provides us some level of security related to what they're doing with their fund balances, how much funding they're actually keeping. And I would say that it might be irresponsible if a school district has some degree of additional funding not to put that aside for future use, whether it's for facilities or for health, safety, and welfare of students.
My time has expired. Thank you much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Mattson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary, and your team for being here. My question's pretty straightforward. I understand that the library regulations are currently being reviewed by the legal department within PDE. When do you expect that we'll be able to see the results?
I would say that those should be out very soon, and I can tell you in advance that the regulations that are being looked at are being changed from ones that were created in the 1960s and some of them in the 1980s and haven't received any changes since then. A lot of those are relaxing some of the current regulations so that public libraries can do more of the great work that they're already doing without additional constraint. And they deal with accessing additional funds based on how they interact with having a director who is full-time.
Okay, thank you very much. Look forward to those.
Thank you, gentlemen. And we are going to recess now for our budget hearings, and we'll come back at 1:15 this afternoon. We will finish out members who have not had opportunity to ask questions that choose to, and then we'll go to a second round of questions before proceeding to committee chairs and then wrapping up. Before we go, we do want to make mention, little birdie told me, somebody's having a special day today. So it kind of sucks that you're here and not on an island somewhere, but we do want to say happy birthday to Secretary Rowe as she enjoys her birthday with us. So happy birthday, Madam Secretary.
I can think of a lot of different ways to spend the day, but I'm happy to be here with you, sir.
We'll see everybody at 1:15. This hearing is recessed until 1:15.